Welcome back and thanks for staying tuned. Of course, it's still Rise and Shine and we're beaming live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa State, Nigeria. Of course, we'll be looking at our focus conversation and we have joining us this morning Dr. Wisdom Enang, senior energy consultant and analyst, joining us all the way from Abuja this morning. Good morning, Dr. Enang. Good to have you on the show this morning. Hello, good morning, Dr. Enang. Good to have you on the show this morning.
Good morning, Uyai. Thank you very much for having me around.
Thank you so much for joining us. We want to have a very strong conversation this
Hi, good
morning.
morning.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Absolutely.
It's a
Yes. So we want to look at the fact that after 90 years of operating in Nigeria, nine
Yeah, no
whole
problem. Yeah.
decades, Shell is about to sell its assets, especially offshore, and leave the country. Of course, they're selling to the tune of 2.4 billion US dollars after 90 years of doing business on our waters and on our soil. This is a really big blow to the oil and gas sector in Nigeria. But first of all, I must ask, for the oil sector, how is this being embraced?
Okay, so I'm going to put a few things in perspective so that that becomes the rider upon which we'll continue the conversation. The first thing that I want to put into perspective is that uh, Shell is not leaving Nigeria. Shell is only divesting part of its assets as a re-strategization, part of its re-strategization of its portfolios. Now, what Shell is doing is this: they're going more into deep water and gas business, for which they have a lot of presence in Nigeria, and they are letting go their onshore and their offshore assets to the marginal field operators who can manage it. And the reason is very simple: a number of reasons. One, it's a strategic change in portfolio that has led to that decision. Two, it's because the wells in the onshore and the shallow water have matured. And when these wells mature and they cannot be driven by reservoir pressure alone, then you begin to have conversations about primary and enhanced recovery for you to get out oil. At that point, the operating cost, what we call the OPEX, becomes really, really high, that it begins to eat into your profit. And if you're a large company like Shell with a massive overhead, then that becomes a very unattractive business. This is why when the OPEX gets so high for the matured wells, the companies then decide that it's time to let it go to a smaller company who can operate it at a smaller scale and be able to recover much of their profits without necessarily having a lot of OPEX constraints. That's on the second part. Then the third part is that Shell just feels in line with their energy transition plans that they need to free up some cash to be able to chase more carbon-friendly business. So it's not like they're leaving. Now, are we worried? Are we shocked? No, we're not, because we know that the divestments is just the opposite side of investments. And each time we have an investment, we know that there's a countdown to the divestments. And in fairness, Shell has actually stayed longer than we thought. There were times during the Ogoni days that we thought Shell would go, but I think they've stayed through. But I think the only concern that everyone in the oil and gas has is, what is the conversation around um, plug and abandonment? What that means is, how do we clean up, some of those environmental hazards that has happened? How do we ensure under the plug and abandonment plan that that they have taken care and put a well compensated plan in place for the local communities, who have, of course, had to experience the detrimental effects of the oil and gas drilling activities. Because what we've seen in times is most oil and gas IOCs shy away from the conversation of environmental cleanup. And when the clamor gets very high for that action to take place, you find out that they begin.
We seem to have lost his audio this morning. We seem to have lost Dr. Enang's audio, but of course we're having a very timely conversation with regards to the fact that Shell Nigeria, like he said, putting it in right perspective, divesting in the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, especially divesting in the oil sector in Nigeria. We hope that we can get back his audio and get back into the pros and cons of this kind of strategic moves in his own opinion. But a lot of Nigerians are not seeing this as a strategic move, just as Wisdom Enang was trying to say this morning. Over the years, in the span of 90 years that Shell has operated on our waterways and on our soil, there's been several issues of oil spillage in the Ogoniland area and several other places, of which they have been made to pay multiples of millions of dollars in compensation. And okay, we have your audio back. Sorry about that. We lost you for a minute. You can go ahead with your thoughts. You were talking about, the expectation of how we are going to handle some offshoot of their processing that they're about to leave behind.
Yeah, so I think that's the conversation about how we can factor in the cleanups, how we can factor in things like the future plugs and abandonment. Because you need to understand something. The Petroleum Industry Act, which was signed in 2021, did not do, prior to that, there wasn't a very great conversation around putting funds towards environmental remediations in the event of leaving. And there wasn't even funds about plug and abandonment, which is how you sustainably preserve the wells that you have been drilling and clean up the environment before you can leave that well and just take off the wellhead and leave it capped. Now, because what the international best practice is that you would need to leave a well, capped, just like the way you found it, and you would need to clean up the surrounding environment. Now, this conversation had not come up prior to the Petroleum Industry Act. So the rhetorical question on my mind is, who is going to pay for this oversight? Is it Shell that is going to be asked to put up money, which they had not budgeted for plug and abandonment and of course, for the future wells, the cleanup as well? Who is taking responsibility before we close up this deal? So because if you're not careful, you will find out that liability will be hanging in the air. The new buyers are going to tell you, well, we're a separate legal entity and we were not part of this liability. And we're not going to have a conversation about this. So it's better to have a clarity around who is inheriting one liability before we can close up that sale. That's just the truth. I know they've quoted the amounts in discussion, but these are imperatives as it affects the lives of the Niger Delta and the conversation that we need to have.
Now, when we are talking about how to handle the mess that is going to be left behind, if the federal government finally agrees to the terms, because that's something we're also going to come to. It seems that the Nigerian government has not given the go-ahead for them to, pack up their bags in that particular area. But we're looking at the fact that as Shell, as an entity, an international entity that has done business on ourselves for 90 years, they're about to leave this waste behind. Now, we're having 5 consortiums come together to be able to carry out the activity of one establishment in 90 years. Now, like you were trying to say just earlier, the financial encumbrance to be able to take care of the menace that is on that waterways is very, very big. But do you think 5 consortiums coming together to run the assets of Shell, do you think that we have what it takes to actually run successfully?
Okay, so from a technical standpoint, I've looked at the consortium. They are made up of ex-Shell staff, management staff, so they know. I mean, headed by ex-Shell staff, so they know their onions. They know, everywhere around the assets, and they know the integrity profile of the assets, of course, and some of those challenges from the assets. I don't take that from them. I think. from a financial perspective, we're not going to, let's not expect much. And the reason is that there is a body language that most financiers put forward, and that's universal. It has nothing to do with a particular company that is coming to take over. When they take over, because of the political volatility that's inherent in Nigeria, the attitude is as soon as we take over, let's drill, and extract oil. Let's explore, produce and extract the oil and sell. You know, a company will not take over and have a business in, let me start cleaning up, because they're thinking about the time value of their money for which they have loaned. They're thinking about the net present value of their money in terms of monetary value. They're also thinking of the return on their investments. So these are all things. So what you find out that what we see is that the first 10 years is actually spent just extracting money back so that they can pay off their loans. And then they begin to talk about expansion plans. So from a technical perspective, I'm confident because, of course, remember, prior to, I think, 2010, when the NOTIC Act, the Local Content Act came into play, we had less than a 10% local content in country. But today we have more than 45% of local content. What that means is that we're having a lot of companies come up to to the game, and they're able to play effective with well and be able to stand in that gap where IoTs have stepped off. Example of it is we have companies like Seplat Energy, we have ITO. These are companies that have stepped in the gap. So I don't doubt their local content. And by the way, most of these companies that have taken over, including the two that I've mentioned, are companies that are filled with former Shell staff, and they do know their onions technically because they ran these assets for years. So I don't have a problem from a technical perspective. My problem is going to be the economic philosophy that sort of surrounds the business that they do. Are they, going to be very interested in doing more explorations and boosting our production quota? Or are they just going to be interested in just drilling and producing the oil, producing the oil from the existing wells so that they can recover their loans? And what impact does that have on the Nigerian economy?
Yeah.
Because the second philosophy would mean that we will not be able to get those fanciful daily production targets that we're looking for. But the first one would mean that there's a concerted effort to now domesticate the industry in a way for which the expansion will add value to the Nigerian economy.
Yeah, that was definitely going to be my, last conversation, because this is a strong economic decolonization that is going to be happening, on the end of Shell. And we must also look at the economic impact that it is going to have on the Nigerian economy. We're already grappling, forex and other, other impacts of all of those kinds of trade. Now, this adds to the number of multinationals that are leaving the country, because, like you said, they're not leaving the country in that sense, but this is a very large divestment. We must talk about Nigeria's economic dependence on the production of oil. Like you have just said, this means also that our daily production is going to fall to a very, very large percentage. We're already not able to keep up with OPEC's quota for Nigeria. Now, if Shell pulls out their financial investments in producing oil, how do you think we're going to fare? And what do you think the Nigerian government should do in this situation? Also remember that it is what is remaining for that divestment to be sealed is the voice and the accenting of the federal government of Nigeria.
Yeah, so it's just to put things in perspective there. The deal will be sealed once we have the consent of the minister, for which it is currently still residing with the president himself.
Yes.
Okay, so the implications is going to be this. So we have, OPEC projections that we need to meet, and we've said in our commitment that I think we're going to go above 2 million barrels per day from this year, actually, before the year runs out. Now, the implications of this thing is when you're doing such a transfer or a handshake, a commercial handshake between a buying and a selling company, there is a contractual incubation period. And that means that during that contractual phase, the top priority is not going to be expanding your production. So what that means is that we might have a contractionary effect on our production in the short term until the new company takes off. And even when they take off the facility, they still need some onboarding time to get acquainted fully with the operations of that facility before they can start boosting production. So we're going to have a little hit on our production capacity. The next thing that we need to be concerned about has more to do with, what is the philosophy of this Nigerian company? Are we going to run it like a typical Nigerian company that runs things to failure? Remember, Shell has had a very, you mentioned 90 years, and that's to show you, and I'll tell you for a fact that as an oil and gas engineer, the guiding principle for most of our facilities is under 30 years of design life. For people to have run a facility for 90 years, it means that they understand the entire rudimentary of maintenance, whether it be preventive maintenance or protective maintenance or turnaround maintenance. Now, the maintenance culture is something that we do not really have a mastery of in Nigeria, and it worries me because the philosophy of the average Nigerian man is to run things to failure. So my question is going to be, what is that philosophy going to be like, and how do we ensure that there is sustainability of these assets, that we don't just run into failure like we've seen some marginal fields being taken over and they're being run to the ground? Yeah. That's the first one. Now, the second one is going to be, there are conversations around energy transition. The transition conversation is, is pretty much, pretty much surrounds, the idea of using gas as the transition fuel to be able to meet our environmental targets as well as our fuel requirements. The question is, how is the government going to play the stewardship role for ensuring that the company that is taking over, and for that matter, other companies that are taking over divested assets, sort of have that first at the back of their mind, the targets, the renewed targets that we have, the increased targets for production of oil, but also intentionally go into drilling and expanding into the gas business. We have gas wells that have not been drilled. We have gas volume that are being flared at the moment. So how do we ensure that the gas aspect of the business is something that the company that is taking over would carry very seriously?
Okay. I'm
just going to say this. You see, when we talk about why don't we have abundant amount of gas, and we don't have, there's then, of course, natural gas in the country, reservoirs, but we're having expensive cooking gas and, of course, other petroleum products. And the answer is very simple. The answer is that we have deposits of gas, but we're not producing. And that's the problem. And once we don't produce, you're only exporting energy, you're not consuming energy, which is one of the imperatives for developing the economy. So these are areas that we think and we hope that the federal government will put out a very strong effort to push those companies to do. Just to end, this particular talk, you see companies like the NLNG saying that they're going to struggle to think about, Train 8, NLNG Train 8. They're currently constructing Train 7. And they gave the reason that the facility is only performing to 45% of its total capacity due to the lack of supply of gas. So you're asking yourself, on one end, we're flaring gas. On the other end, we're lacking gas for export and even internal domestic consumption. So, and the answer is very simple. We lack the infrastructure and the investments to take this gas from where it is being produced to where it is required. These are some of the gaps that we hope the federal government can weigh in and let the guys that are taking over the divested assets to play in and expand our, our energy sector.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wickstrom. And there's so much more conversation we will still have with regards to this as we watch the developments of these divestments going on. But we know for sure that Shell is going to be keeping their gas assets, just as you said, to man the window of transition to greener energy. But let's have that conversation on another date and see how the Nigerian government can take advantage and partner with Shell also at this time to leverage on gas. But thank you so much for giving us your time and Rise and Shine this morning. Let's do this some other time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Of course, have very strong conversations like Dr. Wisdom Enang has said this morning. Shell is not absolutely leaving Nigeria, but divesting some of its assets, especially in oil. But that's the much we can talk about on this edition of Rise and Shine until we return again tomorrow to talk more issues. Stay well and enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Uyai Aniakan. Bye-bye for now.